This is the second of two videos where I'm going to show how to install and configure the Jazz Team server using the WebSphere application server. The first thing we're going to do is make sure that the application server recognizes the Microsoft Active Directory. I'm currently on a local domain here. So what I'm going to do is configure WebSphere to recognize that domain. There is no password currently, so we can just log into WebSphere. That will change in a few minutes. We're going to go to Security, Global Security. And we're going to run the security configuration wizard. Now, there's a couple of things that we're going to need. First thing, I'm going to go get my server name from my domain server. And that is right here. I'm going to go back to my Jazz server where WebSphere is installed. Now I'm going to run the security configuration wizard. I'm going to use a standalone registry. Primary administrator account is admin. The type of LDAP server is Microsoft Active Directory. The host, that's where we got that server name and why. Base distinguished name is DC equals local, comma, DC equals demo, comma, DC equals com. It is not the actual domain, it is how LDAP recognizes it. The bind distinguished name is actually the username. What we're going to do is we're going to use a little tool here called Active Directory Explorer. You can download it for free. And I'm going to actually get the Active Directory username for admin. And we're going to take that information from the Active Directory and we're going to plug that right into the tool. So that is the LDAP Active Directory information, and then the regular password for the user. And then we're going to say finish. Now we're going to set that as the current definition, and we're going to save that. The next thing we're going to do, we're not complete yet, is we're going to configure that to recognize the specific information that I'm using. Now, first of all, we'll test the connection to make sure we can actually get to the directory and it works. All the settings were correct. Now we're going to go to the additional properties and set up the advanced settings. Now what is in here is close, but not exactly right. Instead of category, it needs, for this particular one I'm using, it's going to need class. So we're just going to replace that with the right information. Object class equals user. And the group filter, that also needs to be modified. We need to have the SAM account. That basically is a unique name for the directory. And then we need to have the correct category, but we also have to have the class, just like with the user. For the user ID map and the group ID map, we're also going to use the SAM account name because that is a unique name that can be used. And we're going to do the same thing for the group. These are the settings for the directory or the Active Directory that I currently am using. And it's important to note that this may not be the same for what you're doing. So you need to contact your Active Directory administrator and you need to have him give you the exact information that your directory uses to access or to get into that information and to plug that into the WebSphere server. And once we've made those setting changes, we have to restart WebSphere. And that'll take a minute or two. But we can do that by going into the to the settings here into the profile and stopping and starting the server. And note we want to do that as administrator. Another very important thing to note is that the reason we can do this at this point is because there was no password set up to run the WebSphere administrator. Once we have configured Active Directory to control WebSphere, you won't be able to just stop and start it because it will require some manual information to be plugged in, and because you can't do that from the command window, you'll have to actually restart the server. So now we'll go ahead and restart the server. And once that restarts, we'll go ahead and verify that we are plugged into the Active Directory, and then we'll proceed with the next step of configuring JAS on WebSphere. Alright, now let's go ahead and start the console again. And you'll note that now it's recognizing that the security certificate is not there. We have not configured SSL, and we're not going to because it's not necessary for now. Now, note that if I actually go in and try to log in without a password, it's going to tell me that the login failed. So I'm going to use the admin account, and WebSphere should pick this up from the Active Directory. Now the next thing we're going to do to configure the server for the JAS tools is to go into the applications, and we're going to remove all of the default WebSphere applications. We don't need those, and it's just cluttering up our web server for no reason. So we're going to select each one of these, we're going to stop them, and then uninstall them. And we're going to save that. Now we're ready to begin installing the JAS applications. We have already installed the software onto the server. Note that it is under the JAS team server. And we've installed it to the web apps, not the Tomcat. So our WAR files are located under IBM JAS Team Server, Server Web Apps. The next thing we want to do, first of all, we're getting our instructions from the JAS site. JAS.net, go to JAS.net, then click on Rational Team Concert, which will take you to the Rational Team Concert product page. Scroll to the bottom and select Information Center, which will take you to the IBM Knowledge Center. Then select the version of JAS that you're installing. Under that version of JAS, you'll go to the JAS team server, installing, and then where we are currently is we're under installing the Rational solution, and then we're under deploying and starting the server. Select deploying and starting WebSphere, and under the deploying and starting WebSphere, go to the Integration Solutions console. We've already done this setup on another video. Now we're going to go ahead and deploy the application, which is the second part. We've also uninstalled the basic or the default programs, so that is complete. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to begin with step number 1 under the procedure, and we're going to add the JTS, beginning with the JTS WAR file. We're going to go ahead and add that to the application server. Now note that within those instructions, we're going to basically select all of the standard options, default options, until we get to the map context routes, and then we're going to map the context route to the name of the WAR file, basically, JTS in this case. Once we finish mapping all of the WAR files, which is through step 8, we're going to skip down to step number 12 and do that with all of the other WAR files before we set the security configuration. So if you're following along, that's what we're going to be doing. So we'll go to New Application, New Enterprise Application. The instructions say go to Remote File System, but that's only if you're on a different server than your JS server. In this case, we're on the JS server, so we can browse directly to the folder. See IBM, Jazz Team Server, Server, Web Apps, and we'll select JTS first because that's what the instructions have, but we could start with any of them. Next. Fast path. And the default. Again, the default. And the default. We're going to map the context route as instructed. Next. Verify that everything's right. And click Finish. We will be doing the same thing for each of the applications. Save. And we'll begin again. This time we're just going to start from the top, remembering to skip JTS when we get to it. As you can see, we're just repeating the steps for each of the WAR files. We'll skip down to QM now. And then our final WAR file to load is the RM, which is requirements tool. In this case, Doors Next Gen now. And now all of our applications have been installed, so we can go to the WebSphere Enterprise applications. Now we'll note that all of our files exist. The next steps are to go and map the security. To do that, from the WebSphere Enterprise applications, where we're at currently, we're going to click each of the WAR files and we're going to map the appropriate group mapping to grant security. We're not going to map individual users, we're going to map the groups. As we can see, there are 5 groups that we will need to map as appropriate. Now if we scroll down a little bit, we note that within our WAR files, only a few of them actually have to be tied to groups. Those are the CCM and the QM, the other groups, admin, RM, CLM help, converter, are not required to do the security mapping. So we'll minimize that, and we'll first of all check JTS WAR and go to security role to user group mapping. Within the security mapping, there is a role for each of the groups. JTS, we're going to map which role the group's going to have for JTS. The JTS WAR recognized that these users are available. So we're going to map for the JTS, we're going to map each one its appropriate user. So in this case, we're going to stick with the Jazz group. And we have our Jazz admins. DW admins. Jazz users. And Jazz project admin, Jazz guests. And Jazz project admins. So we've mapped the appropriate groups within the domain to the appropriate groups within the Jazz tool. So once we've done that, we'll say save, and we'll hit OK. We'll save the Jazz or the JTS WAR file, and that's completed. The next one we need to configure is CCM. We'll do the same thing for CCM and QM. Admins. DW admins, users, guests, and project admins. Finally, we'll do our QM more. Note that your information here is case sensitive. Um, and we are done. Now we'll verify that the RM ward does not need the security mapping, and it doesn't. So the other ones don't even call for the security mapping, so we should be good now. At this point, we can go ahead and start the application. So we'll select each one of these and start. Alrighty, and it appears that all of them were successful. If we log out and log back in, they will show up. But what is often the best, I find, is actually restarting the server. In this case, if we log out and log back in, we're going to try that. Under applications, they're all working fine. At this point, the JAS server is up and running, and we can begin configuring the JAS team server for use. WebSphere is now complete, so we can actually log off of the console there and close out of that, and we're done with WebSphere for now. The next thing we want to do before we get started is we're going to go ahead and we're going to create the databases for each of the JAS tools. So we're going to do that by first opening up DB2, a command window using the admin account, run as admin, and then we're going to basically just copy scripts. Note there are 5 windows open. I've opened 4 for time's sake, but we're going to run 5 scripts from the instructions. We'll go back to those, and we're going to set up the database. We are complete. We're finished setting up WebSphere, so we can close that out now. And we're going to now go to setting up a database, DB2. All we're going to do is copy these scripts for each of the data tables or databases. JTS, we're going to copy it into the account, or the window, and run it. CCM, that would be the Team Concert database. QM, this is the Quality Manager database. RM, which is the Doors Next Gen database. And finally, DW, which is the database for the data warehouse. The data warehouse is where JAS will store all of the information that's going to be used for reporting. Once those have all completed, we'll open up a new command window to make sure that all the information is there within the window or available to the window. And we'll run these scripts that will grant access to the DB2 admin account. Now that each of those are complete, we can close those out. And we'll start our final DB2 window and run those scripts to assign ownership to the DB2 admin account. JTS. Grant user to DB2 admin. And then disconnect from JTS. And then we'll reuse those. Instead of JTS, CCM. QM, or CCM. QM. RM. And DW. Now the databases are configured. Final thing we do is run the JTS setup. One last thing we'll do is make sure that our ports are set to the default internet ports. To do that, you open the administrative console again, log in, go to servers, server types, WebSphere application server, server 1, ports, scroll to the bottom, and change the default host and default host secure to the standard internet ports, 80 and 443. The instructions say that you want to verify that those are host aliases, but since they're standard ports, they are. If you change it to anything else, you need to follow the instructions on going to the to make sure that the environment has the host aliases correct. That's all we do for the ports. We can close that window. Now we can go ahead and open up the JAS setup window. Note that the JAS tools have to have a URL, and that URL will stay with the entire with each of the artifacts that are created. Our URL for this server will be local.jts550.com, and the address is JTS setup. You can do a self-signed certificate there with Firefox. And once that's validated, we will need to use our admin and rational, since we are already using the LDAP security. We're going to use custom setup because we're using a database other than Derby. And now we validate that the URI we're using will be the one we're continuing to use for our sessions, and that's correct. You can hit next. The first screen that we're going to get to is the configure databases for the JTS server. Now that's the core server for the JAS tools. We'll enter our DB2 admin password. And then what we're going to do, since we're using DB2, we're going to take the recommended script, we're going to paste it, and we're going to change the user to our correct DB2 user, DB2 admin. It is very important that the password and the be entered as displayed, and that the semicolon be at the end of the statement. If it's not, it won't work. Once you test the settings, it should come back and say that the database is there, but the tables are not. And it did. Now this process can take quite a while. Once that completes, just click the next button. That takes a second. The next screen is the email notification screen. If you don't see this screen, that means you probably clicked the next twice. I'm using the Gmail for this. If you don't have an address in here, it will bark at you when you get to the configuration screen for the accounts. So you do want to go ahead and put an email address in here. Once you've completed the email configuration, it wants you to register the applications. It recognizes the applications that are in the WebSphere server, and it's going to go ahead and automatically configure those for you. When that's complete, click next. So configuring this form is fairly, it's not really complicated, but you have to know the settings. In my case, the LDAP registry location is on the LDAP AD server in the localdomain.com. at port 389. The username configurations I have are in container name admin, container name users, discrete container, local demo com. So that's the way the username is configured. And then the password for admin. Again, base user DN. None of these are the default values. These are based on the information in the actual LDAP registry. User property mapping actually also has to match whatever it is that's in your Active Directory, as does the base group DN. And then again, the JAS group mapping, the default works for that as long as you've named the groups the same. So using the tool that is recommended within the JAS configuration tool, that's one way to get to that information. For example, once you have established a connection with your server, you can get those properties out of the tool. It gives you instructions on how to go to tools, I think. But basically, the way to get the directory search that it's talking about is to go under entry directory search, not tools directory search. But if you've got an Active Directory administrator, they can probably give you that information directly. So for now, we're going to close that. And we're going to go ahead and proceed with the configuration. According to JAS, I have successfully completed the form. There is a warning that says that it can't validate or verify the information, but basically the fact that it recognized the group name properties and the other information, that simply means that there's a configuration concern that it has, but it is recognizing it. Once we get to the end, and if we can actually add users, then that will verify that we set that up right. But again, it's very important that you have an Active Directory administrator help you with these settings. The next step is activating the licenses. If you've already purchased licenses, you can go ahead and skip this step. I'm going to go ahead and activate them and use the trial licenses for this particular version. The primary ones are for the Doors Next Gen is the Analyst, the Quality Control or Quality Manager is the Quality Professional, and for Team Concert it would be the Developer. We could also activate the CLM licenses. I'm not going to do that right now in case I want to do that later. But the CLM licenses for a practitioner will give you access to all three of the JAS tools. When we finish that page, we'll click Next, and then the next phase of our setup will be configuring the data warehouse. Very similar to the Team Concert server, we're going to select our DB2 database and then enter the DB2 password. And then we're going to again copy the script that they've given and paste it into the field and modify it by installing number one with our, instead of JAS, we're going to use the data warehouse database, and the user again is going to be DB2 admin. And here I've actually left the rest of it, so I'm going to make sure that it's just that script, and now we've got the correct script. The additional information in terms of the schema prefix, this is all default, and it really doesn't matter unless you want to put that information in there. You don't have to. If you want to actually give it a space, designate a space on your hard drive or somewhere on the server to do that, you can do that, but it is not necessary. For the user ID for the reports, I simply use ETL user. Again, this is whatever you want to make it. I'm going to use ETL user for all of those, just so it's easy to remember. I'm going to give it my address. And it says that I've done something wrong. Let's make sure that I've entered the script right. check that password. And we're good. Again, once we've made sure we can access the database, we have to have the tool go ahead and create the tables. And this takes quite a bit of time. It takes about 15 minutes sometimes. Once your data warehouse has been configured, go ahead and click Next. The next configuration is for CCM. Remember that even though it says green that it's configured, that's because it's taking the default Derby database, which you are not going to use. Enter the DB2 admin password. Again, we're going to go ahead. We can actually paste because I don't think we've pasted anything else. Change JAS to CCM. User, again, DB2 admin. And everything should be good if we entered the password correctly. Test the connection. By the way, if you click test connection and it doesn't do anything, that's because it's simply acknowledged you've entered something. Sometimes you got to click the screen twice just so that it acknowledges you've done something. If everything's good, go ahead and create the tables. And once that's done, we'll go to the next step. Once the CCM database has been configured, and the table space has been configured, click Next again once. And go ahead and click to do that. That shouldn't take but a few seconds. Once you've done that, click Next. It will want you to set the data warehouse up to receive the information from the CCM database. So enter your DB2 admin password. And that should then be fine. And then enter the password for ETL user. And test the connection. And it should be green because nothing has changed. And once that configures, click Next once. And now it's going to ask you for the configuration information for the Quality Manager tool. Change the database vendor to DB2. DB2 password. Copy the script and paste it into the field. Again, and note we want to make sure that once we paste, we don't leave any extra spaces or things like that. Again, change the database here to QM, like we changed for the other databases. And it's DB2 admin. And we've got our semicolon. So let's go ahead and test the connection. And we're good. We'll go ahead and create the tables now. When the Quality Manager database tables are completed, click Next. You'll need to finalize the application again. When the finalize screen comes up, go ahead and click Finalize Application Setup. Click Next. Again, point to your data warehouse again. Enter your DB2 admin password, your ETL user password. That should test fairly quickly. And then the final configuration is for your requirements management database. Select DB2. Change JTS to RM. User. DB2 admin. Check. And create the tables. For whatever reason, the RM database tables don't take quite as long as the previous ones. So when that's done, you can go ahead and click Next. And then you'll finalize the setup of the RM tool. Once that's done, you'll do another finalize process. Next screen is again finalizing the data warehouse configuration. Pretty straightforward. And then finalize the JTS server application setup. And that's it. Once you've done that, you've completed the setup of the JAS team server.